Hello friends, so these are my August, September, and October 2025 reads. I only read 8 books, but considering how busy I was in the last 3 months, uh, I'm, I'm patting myself on the back for finishing 8 books. This is the first one I read in August. It's called The Pilgrim Hawk by Glenway Wescott. It's a novella that's about 100 pages long. I chose this book because the cover art was very interesting to me. I don't know if this is a photograph or a picture, but it's called 32 Cars for the 20th Century, Play Mozart's Requiem Quietly by Nam June-paik. I think it might be an installation piece, looking at it now. But before this, I had never heard of Glenway Wescott as a writer. He's an American writer, and this book was written in 1940, but it is set in the 1920s, I guess. So it's a roaring 20s novel, kind of like The Great Gatsby. And it's similar to Gatsby in a lot of ways. It's about rich people, first of all. It's set in a French country house owned by an American heiress, and we have a first-person narrator who reminds me a lot of Nick Carraway from The Great Gatsby. And he talks about this, the focal point of the story, though, is this Irish couple named Larry and Madeline Cullen, and this hawk that is a pet of the wife, Madeline Cullen. And the conceit of the story is that the husband, Larry, is very unhappy with how his wife, Madeline, is so obsessed about her hawk. So he has a little like jealousy issue going on. And it's kind of about this weird love triangle between or among the three of them. And I searched about Glenway Wescott, and apparently in his life, he was in a lengthy, long-term love triangle in his own life. So maybe that kind of bled into this novella. But the hawk named Lucy is, I guess, kind of, maybe it's a symbol of an unhappy marriage, because the way Madeline describes Lucy is that, yes, she is in captivity, she's not free, but she has more food and more fun. So to me, it kind of was kind of obviously a metaphor for an unhappy marriage. And in the introduction of this New York Review of Books edition I have, Michael Cunningham calls it, quote, murderously precise and succinct. And I agree with that. This is a novel whose beauty lies in its very concise language. It feels like a little intricate machine, and as you're reading it, you're seeing it unwind. It was beautiful in that way. And also the whole novel is set in a single afternoon. And I also read it in a single afternoon. It's only 100 pages. So as you're reading it, it's almost like you're spending that afternoon with the characters, which was a nice touch. I read it outside, listening to the brook in front of my house. And it was a really beautiful afternoon, and I really enjoyed it. If you're looking for a quick read, if you want to finish something really quickly, or you're going to be on a train ride, or if you want to finish a book and it's really late, I recommend this book. I don't know why it's not more famous. I think it's one of the great, American short novels. And in the back cover, the great novelist Christopher Isherwood, who wrote A Single Man, and that I love, says it is truly a work of art of the kind so rarely achieved or attempted nowadays. It's definitely a unique little novel that deals with very complex emotional stories between the characters, and I highly recommend this novella. The second book I read in September is this book. It's called I Wish for What is Forbidden to Me by Gwija. It's a Korean novel from 1992. It is considered a landmark feminist novel in Korea. Unfortunately, it is not translated into English. Gwija is a very famous writer in Korea, and this is her most famous book, I would say. And I know some of her other works are translated into English, but this book is not. And I had kind of a hard time, like, even finding this Korean copy online. And back in May, my aunt who lives in Seoul got me a copy of this, and thanks to her, I could finally read it. There's a reason why it's considered one of the landmark feminist novels in Korea. It's written in 1992, but the language discussing feminism is very forward. I wouldn't be surprised if this book were written in 2016 or something. It feels very now, and the discussion of feminism is very it is not dated. It doesn't feel dated at all. It concerns a protagonist named Kang Min-ju. She's a young woman working for this nonprofit that helps like victims of domestic violence and women who are suffering from domestic violence and battered women. And she's interesting because she is not a perfect protagonist morally. Even she is very angry about the injustices that women face in the patriarchal, like Confucian Korean society, and they still do, and which is why this book feels still relevant today. But Minju is like, she has faults. She is not perfect, and I think one of her biggest faults is that she is arrogant. She is definitely very competent, but she is arrogant, and she looks down upon women that she helps. So, for example, like women who can't leave their husbands even though they're emotionally or physically abused, she thinks they're weak. But in 1992, women in Korea a lot of women didn't have the economical means to leave their husbands. But she looks down upon them. And she is willing to do anything to make the plight of women in Korean society better. And in her own crazy way, the way she does it is by kidnapping a famous, good-looking male actor whom she thinks is a tool being used by the patriarchal society to, I guess, like ensnare women and make them, and to sell women this fantasy about like a good looking nice man, so that they would stay in the patriarchal system that exploits them. So she kidnaps this famous actor and imprisons him in this apartment that she owns. So the premise is very shocking to begin with, and I wasn't 100% impressed with the ending. I think she could have done more. She could have pushed the envelope more, but even considering my dissatisfaction with the ending, just the language discussing how women live in Korean society and the way it's written was so good that I totally understand why this book, even now, after more than 30 years, is considered one of the best feminist novels that have come out of Korea. If it's not in English, unfortunately, but if you can read Korean, or if this book is translated into a language you can read, you should read it. If you're a Korean woman, if you're one of my friends watching this, and if you're a Korean woman, you should read this book. My first read of September was Satantango by Laszlo Krasnahorkai. I don't know if I'm saying it right, but he's a Hungarian author who has just won the Nobel Prize in Literature. He won it after, like, a few weeks after I finished this book. And that's kind of a once in a lifetime experience where I guess you read a book and you're very impressed by it, and the author wins the most well-known literature prize in the world, right? It's the first exposure I had to this story was actually the 1994 film by Bela Tarr, the 8-hour long one. It was on Criterion Channel a few years back. I watched like the first 30 minutes of it and I couldn't finish it. I didn't have time to finish it, and then it left the platform. I did buy the Blu-ray after that, and I had it for a long time, and I hope I can watch it very soon. So this book is a masterclass in setting apocalyptic atmosphere. I know the film is by Bela Tarr, but it reminded me a lot, for some reason, of Stalker by Andrei Tarkovsky. It has a similar vibe. And that's what I was kind of imagining throughout reading this book. And for example, there's like a sound of bells that you hear throughout the novel, and you don't know where it's coming from. So it's almost like a supernatural, like hearkening, supernatural reminder of the end times. And it is set in Hungary, in a rural village in Hungary. And it is isolated mostly from the outside world, and it begins with Hutaki, a villager named Hutaki, like waking up next to this woman named Mrs. Schmidt, who is kind of an object of sexual attention, sexual obsession of the other men in the village. And he wakes up and he overhears Mr. Schmidt and another guy named Craner talking about, I guess, stealing like months worth of wages that belong to the villagers and running away. And he decides to join that scheme. And later we see this messianic, like charismatic figure named Miyasi come back. He was presumed dead, but he comes back to the village and he tries to swindle the villagers, to his own scheme. And there is a very emotionally affecting chapter in the book that deals with this young girl, and Miyasi tries to use what happened to the young girl as leverage to kind of ensnare the villagers. And it's it was an amazing book. It just leaves such an imprint on you even after you finish it. This dark, and the story is very dark, and it's by no means a happy story, but the tone is sometimes sarcastic, and still very dark, and I wouldn't say it's nihilistic, but it's certainly a very cynical book. And this is a personal analogy in terms of more about aesthetics of the book rather than the contents, maybe to the contents a little bit too. But the book is structured in a really unique way that it goes from chapter 1 to 6 and then it comes back to 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So it has this kind of a mountainous structure, right? And because of that, for me, it reminded me in a weird way of the Bosch triptych, the Garden of Earthly Delights, because that triptych also opens like this, and you see inside, people doing all kinds of things. And it's just a really darkly beautiful novel, and I think it's a very powerful novel. And all my friends who read it already has said different things about it, and I'm really excited to see what my mom's gonna say about it because I'm gonna lend her my copy. If you haven't read it, you should definitely try to read it. It is not an easy read, but it is definitely so worth it. The next book is Joseph Fouche by Stefan Zweig. Stefan Zweig is a very famous author, but this book is actually very little known. And I think it's because this book is not translated into English, sadly. I wanted to read this book for a long time because I read a lot of French Revolution books. I'm very interested in the French Revolution and understanding it because I think it's one of the most important things that happened that has shaped modern democracy. But this book, so I knew about for a long time, but there is no English translation. But I found the Korean copy in Seoul, and I had to buy it. So this is about a lesser-known French statesman named Joseph Fouche. It's his biography. And I think the most notable thing about Fouche is that he outlived everybody. He outlived Robespierre, he outlived Napoleon, and he lived to see the monarchy restored in 1815. And the French Revolution was kind of kickstarted in 1789 with the storming of Bastille prison, right? So he lived a long time through very tumultuous times. And this Zweig is the reason he could live that long is because he was this Machiavellian figure who could betray anyone and change his beliefs to fit the narrative each time it changed. So he didn't believe in anything. Zweig's tone is critical about this, I guess, moral disposition that this person has. And it kind of outlines how his life flowed and how he changed throughout it all. So he started his career as a teacher in a Catholic church system, and then he became a statesman, and he was first more moderate, and then he became more radical and became one of the Jacobins. During his time as the revolutionary statesman, he argued for abolition of personal private property and atheism. And he became a part of this retaliatory coup against Robespierre and survived and succeeded in bringing him down and survived the Reign of Terror. And then he lived through the Napoleonic rule as the Minister of Police, the head of police, and he held that post even after the fall of Napoleon and monarchy was restored with Louis XVIII. I think he is most well known for this genocidal violent suppression of insurrection in Lyon. But he was in power throughout the revolution and the Directory and Napoleonic rule and the restoration of monarchy. Why? And that's because he could do things that are diametrically opposed to his past beliefs. So he started out as a Catholic, member of the Catholic Church, and then he became an atheist, and he argued for abolition of private property, and then later he amassed a great fortune, and he argued for egalitarianism, and then later he became Duke of Otranto. So here's a person who believes in nothing and can betray anybody to survive. And what I like about this book is that Zweig doesn't treat him like this one-off psychopath. He's not a person that's unique to the French Revolution. He's not a particularly evil person even. But he tries to understand the psychology of this Machiavellian figure. And because I believe people like Fouche are not unique to the 1700s, because people like Fouche are everywhere and still exist, I believe that this book is still very valuable even in 2025. Unfortunately, it is not translated into English. I wish it were, but if you can find a copy in your language, or if you can read the original German, and if you like political thrillers, I think you should read this book. The next book is Cheri by Sidonie Gabrielle Collette, and she's often just referred to as Collette. This was my first Collette book. I knew about her, but I never tried her books before. But I was very impressed with this book. It's not a long novel, it's pretty compact. But its form and its pacing and how it runs toward this emotionally devastating conclusion I felt was just perfect. It's like the perfect novel. And it's a story about a woman named Leah and her significantly younger lover named Cheri. Cheri is a boy. And this novel is a very sensual, I would say. I mean, it doesn't feature any like scenes of sex or anything. But what I mean is it places great importance in describing things, little things. So for example, like a pearl necklace or lush drapery in the room, or the food that the characters are eating. For example, like the type of strawberry that Cheri eats, and tea and things like that. And it brings you back to like the Belle Epoque France that this novel is set in. And it's an experience. It's almost like watching a movie, right? Like the descriptions are so vivid that they bring you into that time, which is not an experience that you get very often. And there's a great deal of one thing to note about this book is that there's a great deal of talking about appearance. So if that's your trigger, it's probably not a good book for you. Probably because she is significantly older than her lover. She's 25 years older. Leah is 25 years older than Cheri. She talks about her appearance constantly. She worries about her wrinkles, and she talks about like her figure and how she's, I'm not, that fat yet, and things like that. And that makes you feel a certain kind of way. It hurts, it's something that pulls at you, but that all leads up and builds up to this heartbreaking climax / ending. It ends where a climax is, and it feels like you're driving off a cliff. And that impact is very great. And I know this book has a sequel that's equally, maybe even more emotionally devastating than this. But it's just the cruelty and like the pain that you get emotionally at the end of the book like makes an imprint on you. And even though it is dated, the themes that this book deals with are mostly universal, I would say. They are about, they are things like the fleeting nature of youth and the fear of aging, of getting old, and having to say goodbye to a love that's gonna inevitably end and you can't do anything about it. And also, I guess, roles that men and women, like the gender roles men and women are expected to adhere to in society, especially in like heterosexual relationships. So I think this book is, yes, it's old and sometimes it feels old, but a lot of it is still maybe not relevant, but it still makes you feel things, definitely. Like the emotional potency of the book is still there. And if you wanna experience Belle Epoque era in France, this is a book for you. It makes you live it with the characters, and I enjoyed it a lot. This is the only play I read out of the 8 books. It's L'état de siège by Albert Camus. I think the English translation title is The State of Siege. But in this book, there's an explanation saying that it's supposed to be closer to something like The State of Emergency. And the Korean title, Keomryong, is the same language as martial law. And I decided to read this book because there was a declaration of martial law in Korea in December of 2024, December 6th, 2024, to be exact. And I wanted to try this book because I wanted to see how relevant it would be to today, especially because something like that happened so far away from when this was written, which was 1948. Sorry. And I did buy this book in Korea. I bought the Korean edition. This edition has a very good introduction and a very good explanation at the end about the some criticism about this book and why this book had to be set in Spain instead of any other country, basically. So it's a play by Albert Camus. It's not a long play. It's set in this town called Cadiz in Spain. And I think there, at the time that it was published, there was a little bit of a back and forth between this critic called Gabrielle Marcel and Camus. So Marcel criticized this play for not being set in an Eastern Bloc, like Soviet communist countries. And Camus wrote in response that oppression or oppressive regimes are not unique to Eastern Bloc countries. It is still happening in Spain, and it can happen again in France. So he decided to stage it in a place that's in the true West, in Europe. And I agree with that sentiment because in 2024, the declaration of martial law happened in South Korea, and it led to the president being impeached. And a lot of my friends went out to the streets to protest against the administration and the president that did the illegal martial law. And in the play, there's a character named Diego that really voices the agony of being in the resistance, because sometimes you have to make sacrifices to resist against an oppressive regime, and sometimes that can be economic sanctions and even danger to your personhood and your family. And I saw a lot of parallels between this play and the work of Han Gang, especially when she wrote about Gwangju in the 1980s. And I saw a lot of the language that was used during protests in 2024 and moving on to 2025 in this play. And for that reason, this play is still very much relevant. And I think my Korean friends will definitely recognize themselves in it. And it is definitely not Camus' best work, but I think it is so worth reading even now, because oppressive regimes and fascism, like he said, is not unique to a certain part of the world. It can happen anywhere. It is still happening today. And it was a hard read for that reason. But I think everyone should at least once read this play, because I think this is a very important play that's not very well known and that's being slept on a lot. Another book I read in October is Vineland by Thomas Pynchon, and I guess I kind of jumped on the bandwagon with this book because a lot of people reading it after seeing the movie One Battle After Another by Paul Thomas Anderson. And I saw the movie in late September, and I wanted to read this book because the movie is loosely based on this book. Now, this book is often, I heard some people saying this is Pynchon light, so it's supposed to be a more accessible work by Pynchon. And I guess in a similar way that One Battle After Another is arguably one of Paul Thomas Anderson's most accessible works. And I can see why they would say that. It's not a hard read at all, and Thomas Pynchon definitely has some sort of a reputation for being difficult. But this was my first Pynchon book, and I didn't burn myself out reading it. It's not an easy read by any means, but still very doable. It has a lot of pop culture references, and that's by design. And I think, so if it's translated into another language, I think some sort of annotations would help the readers. But as an American person, I think this book, I could read it without constantly looking things up. And it has a very similar tone to the movie. The movie takes this book's tone and adapts it into film format. It's kind of like almost sarcastic, very comic, even though it's dealing with some heavy themes. And it's dealing with a lot of universal themes that, people can easily relate to. Things like family, maybe like intergenerational, like passing of ideas, resistance and how hard it is, and like what it means to be family, right? And that's all also in One Battle After Another. And a lot of the characters are same as in the movie. So Bob Ferguson in the movie is named Zoid Wheeler in the book. And Willa is a character named Prairie in the book. And Perfidia Beverly Hills is called Frenesi in the book, and Colonel Lockjaw is called Brock Vond in the book. And their stories are very similar to the movie, although they are different. There are differences, and there's like I said, the prose isn't easy. It's crazy. There's a really long, crazy chapter about like Japan, because there's a character named DL in the book. I think she's supposed to be Deandra in the movie, and she's a ninjet, right? And that's DL is featured more prominently in the book than in the movie, and timing-wise, it's set in 1984, which is when Reagan was reelected. So it takes place in a time where like the resistance of the 1960s and like the counterculture of the 60s and the 70s has been kind of snuffed out by this conservative administration. And Reagan administration actually is a lot of the current conservatism is attributed to, Reagan era policies, right? So in that way, I think this book is very important even now. And it does feature a lot of talk about American pop culture. This book was written in 1990, so like the media that keeps on interrupting the people and also the prose is time appropriately television, instead of maybe if this book were written in 2025, it'll be phones, I think, but it's TV. And the language is suited to that particularly. So for example, he calls the Richard Strauss piece, also Zarathustra, he calls it the theme of, instead of it's the piece's real name, he calls it the theme of 2001 Space Odyssey 1968, right? And one interesting mention in the book is actually Sean Penn. He is named in the book as so there's a movie in the book about LA Lakers and Boston Celtics. It's not a real movie, but it says Sean Penn plays Larry Bird in that movie, which is interesting because Sean Penn plays the villain in One Battle After Another, right? And the characters are very crazy. You can tell a lot of them are just paranoid, especially Zoid Wheeler, the protagonist. And like I said, it's the tone is very similar to the movie One Battle After Another. So I think if you enjoy the movie, you should try this book. And this is another like personal analogy that I'm gonna make, but this book felt like something of like a Jackson Pollock painting to me. Like it, as you're reading it, it's like this crazy words and prose, and sometimes you don't know where it's going, but when you finish it and step back and you see this and see the whole thing, you see a beautiful abstract painting, right? So if you are in for that sort of postmodern American literature, and if you're looking to get into Pynchon, I think this is the book. The final book I want to talk about is The Leopard by Guiseppe di Lampedusa. It's an Italian novel. I think it was published in 1958, posthumously. It's a historical novel set in Sicily in 1860, and then it goes on to 1910 when the novel ends. So 1960s is a time of like great societal like overhaul and change in Italy because the Italian unification was happening, and there's gonna be decay and death of the nobility eventually, and this book deals with that. Um, so the I guess the protagonist or the main character of the book is called the prince in the earlier chapters. He's a nobleman living in Sicily, and he's this patriarch in the story, and he's living through this period of great historical turmoil, and he's facing this inevitable wave of decay that his class has to deal with. So he has a daughter named Conchetta and a nephew named Tancredi, and this girl named Angelica, who is from, I guess she's supposed to symbolize like the nouveau riche, the new bourgeoisie class that's supposed to overtake and rival the noble class. And the prince, like in the earlier chapters, the prince recounts seeing a dead soldier in his garden. And although this book talks about a lot of beautiful things, like lavish things, like balls and paintings and palaces and, you know, beautiful drawing rooms and social gatherings and things like that, that sense of death and decay you get from that earlier mention of the dead soldier in the garden kind of prevails over all of that. And that makes perfect sense why Luchino Visconti had to be the one to adapt this book into a film. I saw the 1963 film first, and Visconti is a director who deals masterfully and often with the themes of death and decay, right? So think of Death in Venice and Ludwig, which is also similar to this story about decay and death of nobility. And The Damned also is about death and decay. And The Leopard, the novel, is about death and decay. And it pairs perfectly with, I guess, Visconti's oeuvre, like his body of work. And it's a very specific type of feeling that you get from this book. And even though it's set in like Italian nobility, and I'm not Italian or of the nobility, but I can still very much identify and empathize with the feeling that the prince gets, that everything is changing. Everyone he loves is gonna be gone, some time or the other, and he's going to die. So that sense of mourning is prevalent throughout this novel, and it's beautiful in that way. And the descriptions of life in the Sicilian like noble society is very beautiful. But that feeling of death and decay is just unshakable throughout the whole book, and I enjoyed it a lot. And it ends with a sentence called, listen, the sentence says, "Then all found peace in a heap of livid dust." That's some Barry Lyndon ass ending. And I love this book so much, and I don't know why I put it off so long to finish this book, because I bought this book at a used bookstore a long time ago after seeing the Visconti movie, and just put off reading it. But I think this is the book I enjoy the most out of the 8. And I think I'm gonna reread it pretty soon. And if you haven't seen the movie yet by Visconti, you should see it. Claudia Cardinale, who passed away recently, is beautiful in that movie. She is a vision. Just for her alone, the movie is worth seeing. And the book is beautiful in its own way. I really recommend it. I recommended it to my good friend and he said he's already read it and has the book. But I would definitely recommend it to my other friends. So these are the books. Oop! These are the books that I read in August, September, and October of 2025. I'm really looking forward to hearing what you guys think about these books. I can't wait to see you guys. But until next time, bye.